Thanks. I'm going to pick up on something you said in what I asked Maria Gotsch to do as part of her intro as well. Um, so you mentioned that the part of the drive for this, and we'll come back to the origin story in later questions, but the part of the drive for this was the diversification of the economy. And one thing that I think some folks who observing the startup scene will say is, it's great. Startups are great. They're sexy. They employ these cutting edge people. They develop local skills. They attract venture capital. Um, at least here in the city, many of the startups that have gotten launched, the number of jobs that they end up creating locally compared to the big banks, the big insurance companies, the big media companies, the fashion companies, and some of the consumer product packaged good companies is relatively small. So I guess, Maria, maybe you can touch on this just during your intro. Similarly, it'd be great to explain the partnership for New York City. I'd love to know, and maybe share with the audience, how did the partnership come about? It predates the startup push. And so how did it originally come about and why? And what role has it played in this? How do you work with the city? And maybe you can touch on why startups are something that you care so much about.
Sure. And I'll just click on my background. I'm originally from Chicago, and I went to school in Boston. So New York is kind of the psychological midpoint of those two places, which is why I ended up here. I run the Partnership Fund for New York City, which is the investment arm of the partnership. The partnership, the genesis was Gerald Ford telling New York City, drop dead. And David Rockefeller said, not on my watch. And so he convened the business leaders of New York, which at that time, the business community was not very connected in and engaged in a productive way with the city and state. You had a crisis. And so the partnership became the vehicle to bring the large employers to the table to work in partnership with city and state government. So fast forward to today, the partnership is a membership organization. The members are the top 300, the CEOs of the top 300 large employers. And I guess on that, the good news is as the tech sector has expanded in New York, and as those companies go public, that leadership is now getting to the point where they can go from heads down, maniacally focused on their business to being more civically engaged. So we've actually added a number of CEOs of tech companies post-public. So Kevin Ryan, John Oringer, Tarek Sharif are some of the newest members of the partnership. Partnership does.
That was Gilt Group, Shutterstock, and
Medidata.
Medidata. Thank you.
Our biggest health IT company. You should add that to your talking points.
Rewind, we'll start over again.
Right. So the fund, the genesis of that is the Colombia Mafia. So Henry Kravis in late 90s went around, as he says, with a tin cup asking for $1 million investments from corporations and individuals. So we have a capital source of about $115 million, wow. But we are mission driven with the goal to create jobs and help increase economic activity. So our mission with the city is very similar, and we work on a number of projects with them very collaboratively. But we are definitely firmly coming from the private sector capital, private sector expertise at the table in partnership with government, city and state. So just since we started with George II, I would say New York has been entrepreneurial from the beginning, right? It's just a matter of like where it lies. And you can certainly say that the people that worked on Wall Street are some of the most entrepreneurial people in terms of new ideas, competitive, et cetera. But I think the shift that happened in terms of how we define tech entrepreneurship, I would put the roots of that in the late 90s. And there are a number of reasons. Someplace I read that they attribute part of this to Prodigy blowing up. And so you took all those people that knew about the internet in the very early days, and you, like a dandelion, you set them free. The ability to, New York grew up in applied technology. And so you had all these people that knew about applied technology coming free and sort of partnering with people that were coming out of the corporate sector that came together and started these new businesses. And most of the businesses in the first couple of years were very web-based. In the first 10 years of New York's tech ecosystem, 85% of the startups were in one narrow area: ad tech, e-commerce, digital media. And so I don't know that I agree that we're engineered. I would say there was kind of an accidental thing that happened at the beginning that got this going. I think there was some fuel put on the fire, but I think the fire actually started through some kind of accidents and a couple of things that came together.
And you're talking about the Silicon Alley days at this point. So
I'm
this is like
yes.
95 to
Correct.
01.
And what that did was make it okay to be an entrepreneur, right? Because New York had been a big corporate town. Most people worked for big companies. And the thought of going off and starting your own company was it just wasn't done in New York. It was done, on the West Coast. So it's a little bit like when they had the big boom with the railways. I think those first 6, 7 years laid the tracks. But it gave people permission, and it created the first generation of 1X entrepreneurs. And so by the end of the dot-com boom, we had a number of people in town who I would say were 1.25X, under their belts. They had one maybe quick success, and they were getting started in the second one, and then everything fell apart. Then I think we started a nice steady build. Starting in 2001, and you go to today, we've had as much venture money in the last year as we did in 2000, but it's been a nice, steady kind of increase. So I think we started with a bubble, and we now have a nice firm base.